It should be no surprise to anyone who's been around for a while that Ace Combat is my favorite video game series of all time. Having gotten into Ace Combat through Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation, this arcade flight action series is one that I can't imagine living without nowadays. Having been an Ace Combat player for a number of years now, plus having played older titles for things like retrospectives, I think I'm ready to make and upload this video you're watching now. I've always wanted to do a tier list kind of video where I ranked all the mainline Ace Combat games, but back then I wasn't sure when the time was right, if that makes any sense. I did do a quick tier list ranking of the Ace Combat games on my stream a while back, twitch.tv/ThunderousWolf if you're interested in catching future live streams, but it didn't feel like I set those rankings in stone with how quick it was. I think the time to set things in stone is now though, as I'm ready to share my Ace Combat tier list. Some things to cover real quick before we begin. I'll be using the Ace Combat tier list over on Tiermaker. I tried to find the original creator of this tier list, but I couldn't find a created by part of the template. Each of the games will be ranked from S tier to solitary, S tier being the best of the best, and solitary being the worst of the worst. In each ranking, games will be judged from left to right. So for instance, if I have Ace Combat 0 and 4 in S tier, but from left to right it's 0, 4, then any other games, I'm saying that 0 is slightly better than 4 and any other games to the right of that. This tier list will also be skipping most of the handheld spin-off games such as Skies of Incursion, Northern Wings, Assault Horizon Triggerfinger, etc., although Advance will be in this list. So, without further ado, let's begin. Air Combat, also known as Ace Combat in Japan, is where it all began, the birth of the Ace Combat series. This game is rough to play today. Stiff and janky controls, rough-looking graphics, and lacking many aspects and features of what a modern-day Ace Combat title would have. However, we have to take into consideration that this was the prototype game of the series. This was the very first entry in the franchise, and like with anything in life, you're not going to get everything right on the first try. Because of that, I am placing Air Combat in C tier. Rough to revisit today, but because of this being the birth of Ace Combat, along with it being the very first try at something like this for the developers, we have to give the game some leniency. Ace Combat 2 is a massive improvement from Air Combat. I've described Ace Combat 2 as the gameplay-focused title of the series finding its footing, and there's a good reason why. The game plays so much better than Air Combat for a variety of reasons. The graphics are a huge leap forward from the previous entry, allowing for more visual clarity and therefore more effective fighting. The handling of the aircraft has been improved drastically thanks to the game being able to use the DualShock's analog sticks. No longer are players stuck with moving their plane in 4 general directions. Now, players can be much more precise with all the different directions that the analog sticks have. And to top it all off, Ace Combat 2 is just pure arcade flight action fun. This is the kind of game that I think of for a Friday night gaming session to celebrate the arrival of the weekend. You come home from classes or work, you boot up the game, get some pizza on the way, and just have fun playing, making sure that you wipe your hands thoroughly before picking up the controller in between slices when the pizza gets there, of course. Short enough to be beaten over the course of a single day, but long enough to make the player's purchase of the game worth it. And there's some replay value to Ace Combat 2 as well, with the extra path along with free mission allowing you to take any aircraft you've unlocked into battle. Because of all of that, this game goes into A tier. Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere will be a bit of a different beast to tackle due to there being 2 versions, an international and Japanese version. Beginning with the international version of this game, originally it was supposed to have all of the story and content that's in the Japanese version. However, because Namco didn't hit their sales targets for Ace Combat 3 when it was released in Japan first, they deemed the game a financial failure and cut the funding for the translation efforts that were needed for the international version. As a result, all of the game's story and content needed to be cut from the final build. No animated cutscenes, no comms chatter from pilots, no decision-making moments where you can change factions, none of that. The game's story is told entirely through text walls that aren't even in the European version of this game according to comments on my Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere retrospective, and the story isn't even told that well with there being a number of plot holes present. The international version of Ace Combat 3 goes into solitary as a result. Because of the potential the international version had before Namco panicked and chickened out by cutting the funding, that makes the disappointment of this version version sting even more. The Japanese version of this game, on the other hand, is a very solid entry. Whereas Ace Combat 2 was the gameplay-focused entry in the initial 3 releases, Ace Combat 3 was the story-focused one. Ace Combat 3 innovates in both small and large ways. On the smaller end of things, you have things like the special weapons mechanic making its debut to the franchise and communicating with both allies and enemies. On the larger end of things, you have the animated cutscenes and the different paths you can go down for the campaign by switching factions. As a result, Ace Combat 3 gets put in A tier, but behind Ace Combat 2. I think Ace Combat 3 is a solid entry, and the innovations made here have to be recognized as well. However, I do think that in terms of a pure fun perspective, Ace Combat 2 does beat 3 by just a bit. Ace Combat 4 Shattered Skies, also known in Europe as Ace Combat Distant Thunder, the beginning of the Holy Trinity. It should come as no surprise that Ace Combat 4 is an S-tier game to me. This game was the culminating test of everything that the developers had learned making the first 3 entries. A test that, like I said in my retrospective on this game, they passed with flying colors given its sales figures and status today. It's also the game that essentially allowed Ace Combat to continue existing. If this game was deemed a financial flop as well, who knows what would have happened. Ace Combat 4 has such a great combination of elements between the gameplay, story, music, graphics, and more. Although there are some sore spots throughout the campaign, namely some of the score attack missions that drag on for too long, Ace Combat 4 as a whole is an amazing game. Easy S tier. Ace Combat 5 The Unsung War, also known in Europe as Ace Combat Squadron Leader, is an amazing game as well. That being said, there are small annoyances about this game that I can't shake. Each plane only comes with one special weapon. Each new campaign playthrough, you're stuck with the F5E for the first 4 missions. Some of the missions can be very drawn out and dull, like with Final Option, for example. However, the majority of the missions in the game are great, the game has amazing music, the Unsung War my beloved, and the core gameplay still allows you to be a badass ace pilot. I also like the Wingman command system and how that gameplay mechanic ties into your role of being the squadron leader throughout the game. I'll be honest, I bounced back and forth on this a few times, and I may even want to change my placement of this game after this video goes up, but as of right now, I think Ace Combat 5 is an A tier game ahead of Ace Combat 2 and 3. It just barely misses out on being an S tier game due to the aforementioned small annoyances that build up when you take a look at the big picture. Given how I've only played a little bit of the first mission of Ace Combat Advance a while back, I can't 100% judge this game. However, I'm going to place it on the tier list anyway. F tier. Not solitary, because let's be honest, who thought Ace Combat Advance on the GBA was going to be any good? Whereas expectations were high for Ace Combat 3, I think it's safe to say that expectations were at least lower for Advance. S tier, S tier, S tier, S tier, S tier, S tier. Ace Combat 0 The Belkan War, also known in Europe as Ace Combat The Belkan War. You may pass go, you may collect $200. This game is the GOAT. The smoothest feeling gameplay that we've seen up to this point, a story that isn't afraid to tackle real world issues and why people fight, all while showing the player that war is the farthest thing from black and white. And then you've got the music that plays its part with tracks like Excalibur, Mayhem, The Inferno, Avalon, and of course the GOAT of music that is Zero. I understand the argument that some people may have about this game, how it seems to be just a DLC to 5 given that the 2 games play and look very similar as well, but there's so much more to Zero than that. I'm still upset that this game didn't sell that well, because more people need to experience what I consider the peak of this franchise. S tier ahead of 4. Ace Combat X Skies of Deception is one of the more underrated titles in the franchise, I think. It makes sense why, as any title on a handheld versus a home console or PC is naturally going to get less attention in comparison. But the reason why I love Ace Combat X is because of how the campaign is structured. The replayability factor is through the roof thanks to the game letting you pick the order in which you handle missions. Granted, this was done in air combat, but the one thing that was missing was the enemy reacting to your moves. The Laysath forces in Ace Combat X will react and take take action accordingly with how you tackle the different territories in the current sector that you're on. There are different versions of missions that can play out depending on the order in which you tackle them, leading to a ton of replay value. It's also oddly refreshing to have an Ace Combat game that really tests your skills, as Ace Combat X's Ace difficulty well and truly lives up to its name. Because of that, I'm placing Ace Combat X in S tier. Not better than 0 and 4, but S tier nonetheless. Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation is one of the more divisive games in the series. Some love it, some hate it. Personally, I like it. Is it my favorite Ace Combat game of all time? No. But I do have to recognize the fact that not only was it innovating with larger battlefields made possible by the Xbox 360's hardware, but it's also my first Ace Combat game that I ever played, so I have to give it some brownie points. And this is the game where the CFA-44 Nosferatu, my personal favorite Ace Combat aircraft, made its debut, so this game gets a couple more brownie points too. I also love how there's this emphasis of the Amerian military working together in battle with the Allied attack and cover functions. However, I have to admit that the story is pretty mid, and I wish the roster of aircraft was larger. I'll be placing Ace Combat 6 in A tier. I think that Ace Combat 6 is better than 2 and 3, but not better than 5. Ace Combat Joint Assault is a game I remember playing a bunch on my PlayStation Vita back then. It was that game and Killzone Mercenary. Those were my two favorites. Focusing back on Joint Assault, nowadays I don't have that same love for this game. Having gotten older since I first began playing this game, and wiser, I think, I'm now aware of a lot of the flaws that Joint Assault has. Firstly, the progression for each of the aircraft is too grindy for my taste. Yeah, having to grind for each of the standard and special weapons does get players to fly a particular aircraft more, but for me at least, I vastly prefer having access to all of the special weapons right out the gate for purchase rather than needing to grind for them. Secondly, the handling model of the aircraft is very sluggish. As a kid, I would always max out speed and mobility with the part system, sacrificing whatever other stats I needed to in order to achieve that. I still do that today, but nowadays I know exactly why I did/do that. Maximizing your mobility and speed gives you that Ace Combat feeling of flying your aircraft, if that makes any sense. The base stats without any parts have the aircraft feeling sluggish and slow to fly. Which, sure, you could make the argument that the whole point of the aircraft being sluggish on their own is an incentive to earn and equip parts, especially since parts were only available on the original aircraft in Ace Combat X, them being available on all aircraft here in Joint Assault is a big change. But any aircraft with low stats in previous games had their fair share of weaknesses, yeah, but they weren't a full-blown pain in the ass to fly. Some missions in Joint Assault are painful to get through as well, in particular Blockade. To any video game developers watching who may be looking to make an arcade flight action game, if there's enough downtime in a mission to where I can divert my attention to my other monitor, open up a new tab, go through the process of ordering some pizza, come back, and my aircraft hasn't been shot down by an enemy, crashed into a piece of terrain, or left the combat zone entirely, you've got a problem with the pacing of your level. And the story of Joint Assault is... I mean, I can't be too mad at it because at the end of the day, the main message of this game's story is capitalism is bad. It's just that after main messages and themes such as it's possible to have honor and chivalry in war, the world is f***ed and needs to be entirely reset, or at least major change needs to happen ASAP, and we're going to get through this and liberate our country, we have to stay strong and keep fighting, to name a few, an anti-capitalism message is out of the blue. A welcome one, don't get me wrong, but still out of the blue. Taking all of this into account, Joint Assault goes into C tier ahead of Air Combat, with the caveat that I haven't played Joint Assault's multiplayer yet. I'm willing to bet good money that if I got Joint Assault's multiplayer to work and got some friends to experience that with, I could totally justify bumping this up to a B tier. For now though, looking at this game through just the single player experience, I'm content with placing it in C tier. I was thinking about placing it in D tier, but for as many problems as there are with Joint Assault, I think it does just enough right as well to warrant C tier. Assault Horizon. Oh boy. Where do I even begin with this game? The freedom to pick whatever aircraft you want for a mission is gone, as each mission you're given a set of aircraft to pick from. Because the freedom to pick whatever aircraft you want is gone, there's no sense of progression either, as you don't unlock aircraft and special weapons with a form of currency. Dogfight mode makes it so that a lot of the game is on rails. Skillful flying isn't as emphasized as a result, as you just need to follow where the enemy is going to get the kill. The target aces exacerbate this issue because they're often invincible up to a certain point in order to have the player chase them through a scripted scripted close call in order to try and give that wow factor to the game. Ironically, because it's painfully obvious what the game is trying to do, it just makes things worse. The game doesn't trust your ability to handle performing ground attacks with airstrike mode. Speaking of ground attack aircraft, attackers are only flyable for one mission in the campaign. Because attackers can't initiate dogfight mode in this game, and because in every other mission where you fly a plane, DFM is required at some point, aircraft like the Warthog, Viper Zero, Nighthawk, etc. can only be flown in the mission hostile fleet. The game story is another one of those internal political struggle in Russia featuring Russian rebels plots that had been done to death by that point in video games as a whole. None of the characters are all that memorable. There's hardly any enemy comms chatter outside of communicating with enemy bosses. The bosses themselves are boring to fight, as you just need to keep them within DFM range and within the DFM circle with no real tactics or strategy needed to beat them. You don't have that moment of becoming the ace that can single-handedly turn the tide of a war, even if the game attempts to shove that in at the very end with Magic saying it's a battle between aces during the Markov fight. The final boss fight is a snooze fest because Markov is invincible up until the scripted moment happens where he lines up the shot to drop Trinity on the White House. I could go on and on and on about this game. But this isn't an Assault Horizon retrospective, so for the sake of not making this part of the video 20 plus minutes, I'll stop here and say that Assault Horizon is a D tier game to me. Maybe C tier if you take the multiplayer of this game into account, but I'm keeping my placement of D tier. The one thing that saves this game from being F tier is the music. No matter how the rest of the game is, Assault Horizon's music goes hard. The remake of Ace Combat 2 on the 3DS. Ace Combat Assault Horizon Legacy, also known in Japan as Ace Combat 3D Cross Rumble, is a game that I like, but also a game I'm not crazy for. I appreciate the fresh coat of paint that's given to the remake here, with a lot of modern-day Ace Combat elements included, like the comms chatter from enemies, enemy Ace Squadron intros from Zero, etc. I also have my fair share of pet peeves with this game, though, such as not being able to pick a special weapon for your wingman, and a lot of the missions being time-based for an S rank and not score-based, essentially how fast you complete a mission versus how efficiently you complete it. Taking all of that into account, Assault Horizon Legacy is a B tier game to me. A good Ace Combat game, but not full-blown fantastic. Infinity is a very unique game to tackle for this tier list. Firstly, you can't play this game anymore, as the official servers have been shut down for years by now. Secondly, back when Infinity was up, it was a free-to-play multiplayer-focused title. It did have a single-player campaign as an introduction to the basics of flying and how core mechanics in the multiplayer worked, but that was the only single-player content this game offered. Solo content that relied on the connection to the servers, so you can't even play Infinity single-player today. Always online DRM, oh boy! Infinity had a bit of a rocky start, being called a pay-to-play, not pay-to-win, pay-to-play game with how the fuel system initially worked. Thankfully, the fuel system was improved so that reserve fuel could be earned by completing various challenges. And the content that Infinity offered was great too, as there were a ton of aircraft to fly, research, level up, and more. You had various Ace Combat super weapons as emergency sorties that could show up in the midst of regular matches. Stonehenge, the Igaion, Excalibur, the Solg, and more. All while there were tons of flyable Ace aircraft that counted as their own individual planes to fly, research, level up, and more as well. Infinity was essentially Ace Combat greatest hits. I played a bit of it back then as a kid, but I didn't get nearly enough time as I would have liked to. Maybe a revival project will happen one day for Infinity. Who knows? Even though you can't play this game anymore as of this video, I'm still going to give it a ranking. Infinity was an A tier game to me. I'm placing it on the low end of A tier behind everything else because I feel like B tier would be too low, but I also think that 5, 6, 2, and 3 are better. Then again, you can argue that there's an asterisk next to Infinity since I would need to replay that game today to give a true 100% fair assessment, but as of right now, that's unfortunately not possible. The return to form for the series, and the title that introduced thousands of people to this franchise for the first time. Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown is an amazing game. Beautiful graphics, buttery smooth gameplay, amazing music, Daredevil My Beloved, amazing DLC support for both the 3 DLC missions and the aircraft sets, amazing mod support if you're on PC, and more. Ace Combat 7's single-player offering is fantastic, and is absolutely worth the price. Its multiplayer, though, Ace Combat 7's multiplayer doesn't have a lot of meat surrounding the bone. You have a team deathmatch and free-for-all game mode, and that's it. There's no co-op PvE modes, no reason to use attackers as there are no ground targets to go after, no super weapon boss fights, none of that. Especially when you think about how we went from Infinity's multiplayer to what 7 offers, the disappointment is understandable. In all fairness, Ace Combat 7 was a multiplayer-focused title, whereas 7 is a single-player-focused one. As a result, I can see where people come from if they say it's unfair to compare the two. But even if we're not comparing 7's multiplayer to Infinity's, what's offered here is still pretty bare bones. Taking all of that into account, Ace Combat 7 is an A-tier game ahead of all the others in this spot. The reason why 7 misses out on that coveted S-tier is due to the bare bones multiplayer. And that's my Ace Combat tier list. I know that plenty of people's tier lists will be different from mine, so I invite you to post a comment saying where you'd place each Ace Combat game. Do you agree with my placements? Disagree? Let me know in the comments. I'd be interested to see what you all think. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and peace out.